Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Vulnerability Time. I am your host and published author, Josias Abriel. How's everyone doing today? I'm doing horrible today. And, in the sake of Vulnerability Time, we love to be honest. However, with us today, we have a new guest from Germany. Go ahead and we'll be talking about self-love journey and toxic masculinity. With our guest, Jamayne, right?
Hi.
Hi. So tell us a little bit about you. What's your major? Where you're from? Any hobbies you like?
Okay. So my name is Jamayne. I'm originally from Rheinland-Pfalz in Germany.
Nice.
And I'm here in the United States currently to study psychology because here's a nice place to study psychology.
Yes. How do you like American culture so far? Did you eat a lot of burgers, a lot of French fries?
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily that's American culture so much, but I did enjoy it. Yeah, it's definitely the best place to get those things.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, what are your hobbies? Any hobbies that you like to do?
I really like to work out.
Okay.
I really like to work out and to.
How much do you bench?
How much do I bench?
Yeah.
Oh, can I say it in kilograms?
Sure.
This
The
is-
majority of
yeah.
the world knows kilograms. The only
Okay.
people that struggle with it is back in the US.
Okay, I would say for reps I can do 140 kilograms and my max would be 175.
Oh, that's
Just-
nothing. I do 176.
That's crazy.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding. That's hilarious. Okay, yeah, okay. Now, how long have you been on your workout journey?
I started when I was 15 years old, so right now 8 years where I was consistent.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. High five.
High five.
Go
Yeah,
you.
so
High five.
I hope people heard that. If not, we have to dab ourselves up later. And
Yeah. Everyone be high fived. Be high five. Okay, so self-love journey
yeah,
and toxic masculinity.
yeah.
So why those topics, and what's your reasoning for choosing those topics? What's your why? What's your story with that?
What's my why? What's my story? So before I started working out, I had grown up in an environment which was very, I don't want to say bad, but it was like a very difficult environment to grow up in when it comes to topics around mental health, because a lot of my friends had mental illnesses, some of them diagnosed, some of them not diagnosed, but later when you grow up and you learn about this stuff and you think about symptoms and so on and so forth, you kind of understand that a lot of people around you when you were younger had problems, right? And so I grew up in an environment where it was very common to see that people were depressed or they had suicidal ideations or they were substance abusers, stuff like that, right? And that was related to family members, but also some of my friends. And when you grow up as a kid and you don't have that proper guidance to keep yourself healthy or stay away from making friends like that, you are inevitably in those kinds of environments, right? And you see this as your normalcy, right?
Right.
And so that was my upbringing in a lot of my teenage years, right? So that, and that at some point when you hang out with people, so there's a saying, right, where people say that you're the median of your friend group, basically, right? That you're like, kind of a mix, an amalgamation of the people that you hang out with.
Right.
They
Yeah.
influence you.
Yeah.
And at some point, what I mean to say with this, it did influence me in a way that I was also heavily depressed. And we're speaking about me at 12, 13, 14 years old at this point. I was heavily depressed. And I was also suffering with suicidal ideation.
For those who don't know, tell us what suicidal ideation is.
Well, you're more prone to commit suicide, or at least plan for it. Doesn't necessarily mean you will go through with it, but
There's a lot of thoughts, suicidal
Yeah,
thoughts there.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of thoughts, and
Okay.
when you're likely to make plans for it, you're also more likely to follow up on it, and so that's like the kind of mindset that you're in. But and you know about it too. You know,
Right,
yeah,
yeah.
we had those conversations, and
Mhm.
yeah. So that was my reality at 14 years old,
Mhm.
and so I came from a bad place. I'll say it like that. And long story short, I did develop a plan,
Mhm.
but I didn't go through with it because there was one pivotal moment where there was a girl who at that point was my friend. And I told her about it because I could just confide in her. And I told her specifically because she had a similar predicament, right?
Mhm.
Now she has actually tried it,
Mhm.
and like thankfully she failed
Mhm.
with the suicide attempt, right?
Uh-huh.
So she didn't go through. But I felt that it is appropriate for me to tell her because she's already experienced it. And then I
Yeah.
told her, and you know, when you're so depressed and in such a dark place and
Mhm.
you have that suicidal ideation, you often feel there's like an inherent feeling of worthlessness,
Yes.
right? That like
Mhm.
that's like always ever present,
Yeah.
and just not wanting to stand up because you don't see a point in living, right?
Yeah.
And so I tell her about all of this, and she just stands there, looks at me in the eyes, says nothing, and cries.
Mhm. Mm.
And for me, that's all it took
Yeah.
to be willing to turn my life around.
Mhm.
To just see that in that little gesture, without any words, in that little gesture, I
Mhm.
saw that your life, even if it might not be super meaningful in the grand scheme of the world, it does have meaning to the people who are around you.
Mhm.
And they will be affected by the things that you do or
Mhm.
don't do.
Mhm.
And to go through with something with that gravity will affect the people that you care about
Mhm.
in a really, really heavy way. And,
Yeah.
and that moment, it snapped me back.
Mhm.
And that was like when I was like, okay, I gotta do something, I
Mhm.
gotta turn it around.
You know, that's interesting that I like that you shared how she didn't say a word, she just cried. Because something that I learned recently, and when I say recently, I mean like 3 days ago, is that, sometimes the eyes can say more than words can.
Yeah.
Just the eyes can tell a different story than words can. So, and also I want to highlight the importance of, being a space, a safe enough space to where folks can open up to us, and tell us, people around us, close to us, tell us,
Yeah.
if they're thinking about, dying or killing themselves.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I think that's very important that um, you had that individual that you could open up to, you know, because there's a difference between someone who, yes, you can open up to, and they will definitely like be there for
Yeah.
you and be just as great. But sometimes we just don't feel that though. Like,
Yeah.
like, so the fact that you felt safe enough to, be open, honest, and vulnerable, and then last thing that I noticed is like, she, was familiar already with suicidal
Yes,
ideation.
that was important.
Yeah.
that's-
So she was able to, because of her experience, she was able to understand on a deeper level.
Yeah.
On a deeper level, and I think that's important. So that just reminds me of like a lot of times, like when I go through things, sometimes I hate that they happen in vain,
Yeah.
or feel like they happen in vain.
Yeah.
Which that's a valid feeling. You know what I mean? That's valid. And to add on to that is, because I experienced that, I can now relate to someone
Yeah.
on a deeper level who's experiencing it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Just that capacity for empathy is so important, right? You
right.
want to reach out to someone who empathizes with you because you know that they went through this.
Right. And there's a difference between sympathy and empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. But yes, continue. So,
How would you want me to continue? Yeah.
so you left off at the part where you said you after seeing her cry,
Yeah.
that turned you around.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, of course, it didn't happen immediately because coming from a mindset like this, it's really difficult.
It's hard.
To, yeah, like if you don't, because I never sought that intervention from outside because I also didn't feel like sharing, and the people around me who were supposed to take care of me didn't really see the signs.
Yeah.
Right? Which I guess is fine in retrospect because I guess people often are busy with their own things, and so I don't hold a grudge against anyone. Right? So, since it didn't happen immediately, there was like a period of a year in between where I was just focusing on school a little bit more, and then I was 15 years old, and that's when I started going to the gym. And I went with a strict regularity in the beginning, not necessarily because I thought it's going to improve my mental state, but because mostly my father was paying for it. And I was like, I'm not going to waste your money, man. I'm going to go to train. And then I never stopped. And then, of course, I stopped after my workouts. I'm not like consistently.
Right.
Yeah. And then I never stopped doing it consistently. And I don't want to attribute all of my growth when it comes to my mental health to the gym, because that would just be a straight oversimplification.
But it was a significant help.
But it was a significant help.
Yeah.
Mostly because not only do you feel better about yourself when you start working out, because you have physiological responses like endorphins, and you start respecting yourself more because you're more disciplined about something, and you have an activity which gives you a creative outlet, all of those stuff which we know they will contribute to improving your mental health eventually. But also, it gave me a lot of purpose in the sense that I was always very particular and meticulous about things. And so I wanted to know a lot about it, and so I educated myself, and educated myself, and educated myself, and educated myself. And it just so happens that most of that educational material in that period of time was written in English. And in order for me to adapt and to be able to keep up, I had to learn how to speak, write, and read English. Which is the reason why I'm sitting here right now and I can hold like a super fluent conversation, right? Because I've been just exposed to it. And so that was like an inadvertent effect of something else, which is not really related to the activity itself, but that. And so I studied a lot because it just interested me. I had all of these positive factors that the gym usually brings when talking about mental health improvements. And I had a sense of purpose now, and people who were like-minded and shared that with me, and so also a little bit of a social aspect. And then gradually, over time, it started getting better. At the beginning, I do want to have a word of caution and honesty. At the beginning, when you come from a place where your mental health is objectively in a not optimal place. Just going to the gym regularly will make a difference, but it might not fix all your problems. Because what initially happened was that then I had issues with my body image. And so, since I was also extremely overweight at that point, and then I went to the gym regularly, and I was not yet really educated about the intricacies of nutrition, I became anorexic for the first 3 years, right? So if you look at pictures of me, right, you can see me as a 14, 15-year-old who's like extremely overweight, and then me at 17, 18, extremely underweight. You know, we're talking like striations in my face and everything because it was like such low body weight. And then what happened again was the people around me whom I cared about saying something.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that made me reflect. And the moment which turned me around at that point,
Mm.
this is a funny parallel. So it was another girl who was my friend at that
Mhm.
point, and she has always been trying to subtly make me eat more food.
Mhm.
And of course, I'm not dumb. You know, I understood what she was trying to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
But there was one day in particular where there was like a little fair going on in my
Mhm.
hometown.
Mhm.
And I told you earlier, I started going to the gym regularly because my dad paid for it and I didn't want to waste his money.
Mhm.
She knew me really well.
Yeah.
So at that fair, she bought me 3 gigantic balls of ice cream
Nice.
and
Nice.
then just told me to eat it, and I didn't want to waste her money.
Yeah.
And
So you ate it. Yeah.
So I ate it. And I woke up the next day and I felt like, oh my god, I'm gonna feel so shitty because I just ate something unhealthy and stuff like that, but I didn't. And
Mhm.
eating those 3 balls of ice cream made me feel really good for a while.
Yeah.
Because I shared it with someone whom I care about, and and she bought it for me, and it was, who likes eating, like, who doesn't like eating ice cream?
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. Yeah.
And in retrospect, that moment also just made me reflect on where my mind is at the moment right now.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking, you know, people care about me in that sense, and also sometimes indulging in pleasures like this is worth so much more than any obsession that you could have about something,
Mhm.
because it does add to your quality of life.
Mm.
So that was the second pivotal moment where I reflected, and ever since then, it normalized a
Mhm.
lot. And then we have that period from 18 to now.
Mhm.
So it's like a second,
Yeah.
you know.
Where did self-love increase,
Where did self-love
or where did
increase?
it start?
Where did it start? So, to be honest,
Mhm.
I think a lot of guys can identify with this or somehow relate when you go through puberty and you get, your body does physiological changes, and I just happened to also start working out during my puberty, and I found myself more physically attractive,
Mhm.
and that gave me like a false sense of self-love because
Okay.
I tended to become extremely arrogant.
Oh,
you know?
gotcha.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I think what is important to mention here is that
You can be arrogant without loving yourself,
Mhm.
or you can have
Yeah.
you can be really haughty, like very like,
Mhm.
in German we would say high-nosed. You know what I mean? This one, yeah.
Got your nose, yeah.
very arrogant without necessarily loving yourself,
Mhm.
and that was me.
Okay.
Because deep down, I had still those feelings of inadequacy that I had from
Right,
my
right.
childhood or
Mhm.
my early adolescence, right?
Right. Right.
And so that didn't necessarily improve.
Mhm.
But then, what really did it for me
Mhm.
was when after the age of 18, when my first real friendships,
Okay.
and people who consistently stayed in my life no matter what I did, no matter if I messed up, or they
Mhm.
would just stay there and like be loving friends to me.
Mhm.
And that's where this idea slowly crept into my mind that if you have people that genuinely care about you and give you those positive feelings, and you give this back by genuinely caring about them, your image of yourself improves drastically, because you
Right.
know, you see that at the end of the day you're also just a human being,
Right.
and there's
Right.
people that still love you even though if you have
Yeah.
faults,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's where it started, where I started loving myself, because I knew that people will stay there for who I am as a person. And
Right.
to a certain degree, I do believe that your capacity of loving yourself is linked to the feedback that you get by the things or the people that you care about.
Right.
Right?
Mhm.
So yeah, it is very rooted in your community and having a healthy community.
Right.
And also just finding out who you are and staying true to that.
Mhm.
And since I'm 23 years old right now, and I don't want to say I have completely figured out.
Same.
That's crazy. Would
Yeah.
you say you have completely figured it out?
Oh God, no.
See, and that's I think.
I'm proud of where I'm at.
Oh, I
But-
I
right.
totally love that for you. I totally agree. I totally agree.
Mhm.
It's you can be super proud even though you haven't figured yourself out. Oh yeah.
I'll get closer.
Sorry, guys, I'm
Just in
gonna
case,
scream
just in
into the
case.
mic, yeah.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, but you can be super proud of where you are even though you didn't have like completely figured yourself out.
Right.
That being said, I think
Because it's a
Yeah.
It's a journey, not
Yeah.
necessarily a destination.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So it's
Exactly.
like, yeah.
So if you know where you're going and you can trust yourself and you know that you have like set your mind on where you're going and you're going that way and you're making progress,
even if it's small, and then you have a strong network of people that care about you,
Mhm.
that's a really good recipe for loving yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
You know something that I'm getting from what you're saying,
Yeah.
and this is something that I think about,
Yeah.
and something I've said in previous episodes, like in season 1 and season 2. You know, when it comes to self-love.
And this is just an observation. I'm not saying that this is this way for everyone else, but I think it could be a reality for some.
yeah.
Is that, you know, self-love doesn't always just start with self. You know, I think others influence and can help us along that journey.
Definitely.
And I think we can continue to carry the love and do, you know, work on our own, but I don't think it starts with just us. As human beings, we are communal beings. You know, we need each other.
Yep.
We influence each other, you know. And something that I also learned from my life is that I was taught to hate myself.
Mhm.
Okay?
Mhm.
And I didn't teach myself to hate myself. I was taught from external forces to hate myself.
Yeah.
The same can be with loving yourself. Could external forces help teach you to love yourself? You
I
know?
think that would be good parenting, you know,
Yeah.
or just being good friends. Yeah.
Y'all know how my parents are. So, yeah, and mind you, I'm not saying that this is this way for everyone. Everyone is different. You know, people have different experiences. But I think it can be a reality for some people that, you know, self-love didn't start, continue, or end with just the self. I think the self is a part of it.
Yeah.
You know, a huge part of it. But I don't think that it's an isolated thing. I think our external forces can influence
Yeah.
our internal, you know, and can help us shape that and continue it.
Yeah.
You know, but if all you're given is to hate yourself, and for example, society, like you can have like great parents and family that teach you to love yourself, but you also have a society that is gonna tell you this is how you should look.
Yeah.
You should have this body type, or your hair should be a little bit longer, or you know your teeth could be a little bit whiter. You know, and then you have these celebrities that you know whose body is, you know, they put a lot of money into their bodies. You know, it's not necessarily natural, but we can look up to those bodies and feel less than.
Mm.
You know, like for example, I noticed on like commercials and movies and stuff like that. It's not saying all, but I've noticed a lot of a specific body type
Yeah.
on movies, on commercials, you know, and that can cause like internal conflict. You know, we can internalize that,
Yeah.
you know, and we can begin to see something wrong with ourselves. We should look like that, you know what I mean? And so basically the point that I'm making is that, especially thanks to your story as well, it's like, you know, our external can influence our internal.
Yeah.
You know, and how the self-love journey, though the self is a part of it, what if, and I'm sure this is the way with a lot of people, like me and you said it in your story, I said it in mine, that, you know, it's not just self
Yeah.
necessarily, that's the start, continuation, or end. External is important, and I just would like to see humans, recognize that we do need each other.
Yeah, totally.
I know we live in a very capitalist type of system sometimes, all the time. That's just how that is. That encourages individuality, and I'm just like, well, that's not how humans were meant to operate to begin with. Humans are communal beings. We're verbal creatures. We can communicate. We affect each other. We infect each other. COVID, so it's just like, yeah, we're connected. We're connected.
That's true.
This building that we're sitting in while we're recording this episode, it took multiple hands to come together to build this.
Yeah.
It wasn't just one.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just thought that was important.
Community is important. Yeah. Community is very, very important.
So I feel like the word self-love, I think that's a great word, but I don't think it fully captures the journey.
Yeah.
But I think it's as close as I can get. So.
And I do think now that we're another factor that also bounces off of that when we're specifically talking about your community and having your head in the right place and actually following up on that, I think what also comes into it is a sense of morality, right? And not necessarily an adopted moral code from somewhere else, but like a morality that is, of course, informed by the forces around us, but also a genuine, true sense of what you believe is right, and not what someone else tells you to do, not what someone else tells you you should have or should be, as we were just mentioning, but what you think and what you see is doing a positive impact for the people around you, which are the right actions that you should be, or the right principles that you should be living by, right? And I think following that is also important because of a couple of reasons, right? First off, generally, we appreciate if people around us have a strong moral sense because it is just easier to get along with them, more pleasant to get along with them, and they make systems like governance in different levels work better. Having a strong code of ethics, following that. And on an interpersonal level,
I like that word. For those who don't know, please let us know what interpersonal means.
Well, I would say in that case, we're talking about the relationship between two or multiple people, right? But going off of your own convictions on an interpersonal level in relation to other people, I think why a sense of morality makes so much of a difference is that you're able to positively influence and guide other people's actions by being a role model of behavior that is to be aspired to by other people, right? And we're saying the basic tenets like being decent to other people, being consistent on your role in society and following up with it, being disciplined, being reliable, you know, stuff like this, and being respectful of other people's, I guess, being respectful of other people's space and their being, you know, those kinds of things, and that's really, really important to be able to just go to sleep at night without hating yourself, you know, and also to be respected by others.
And that's something that also comes into there, that if you know you can follow your own sense of morality and have a compass that is well informed, it makes it a lot easier to be able to love yourself as well.
Yeah.
So it is time to, it's worth to invest time in thinking about that.
Right. I like time. That's true. You know, the process and progress, all a part of the journey. You know what I mean? The journey can look different tomorrow than it does today, and than it does in a year from now. So yes, I like that. Okay,
Now, toxic masculinity.
Okay.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Why did you choose that topic to discuss?
So when we're talking about self-love,
Mm.
I feel like nowadays we're in a climate, when you look at many people in online spaces, for example, where there are people who are inevitably influencing a large crowd of people.
And we see a lot of that are male influencers who affect and influence young males.
There's a word for that. It's called the manosphere. That's literally the word for it.
Right.
It's literally called the manosphere. We're
The
learning about
manosphere.
it in class.
And I don't think the manosphere as a whole is a bad thing,
Because in total, I understand that a lot of it is just a quote unquote retreat for these young people who are disillusioned in our society.
Have you heard of the word before?
Manosphere?
Mhm.
Yes.
Nice. Okay, continue.
So these young people who are disillusioned in our society to find a retreat and feelings of connection, but mostly feelings of empowerment. Right? And I feel like within the manosphere there are a lot of people who are very toxic and who inform a lot of stereotypes which are unattainable if you don't go over corpses. Right? Not everyone can drive a Lambo. Not everyone should drive a Lambo. But not everyone can drive a Lambo. Not everyone should drive a Lambo. But what I mean to say with this is that usually some of the things that we see in the manosphere which are preached as ideal characteristics for males are to be financially hyper successful, to be extremely fit or extremely muscular, which I can sort of relate, but because I genuinely just love doing it, and to be, I guess, very well liked by a lot of women, right? To be like a Casanova, something like that, right? And when you take a deeper thought, and often in these spaces it is rationalized to aspire to have these things. But then when you think a little further and you reflect about this stuff, you kind of begin to understand that attaining all of these things is A, unrealistic, and B, brings sacrifices in your life to things that you might actually really enjoy. And so what this inadvertently does is that it influences people to create an army of clones of people who all think the same way, dress the same way, do the same things, and have the same goals. And it kills the individuality of people, right? And so I think that is toxic masculinity. Not necessarily that there are some people who do want to be super financially successful,
Right.
And there are some people who do want to have a lot of muscles, and there are some people who just do love flirting with everyone, and that's fine.
Right.
But just to push people to do these things and then inadvertently become toxic in the process and destroying their little communities that could give them nice feedback and contribute to their self-love, destroying those communities by just sometimes just being a dick, to say it as it is, right?
Well, it's vulnerability time. We say whatever. Yeah.
That is the issue that I see with these places, what creates toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
To become successful at the expense of other people's well-being.
Yeah. Oh, don't get me started on how that sounds like a symptom of capitalism as well. Which what it does is it kills the human and just creates object or robot. From my experience with toxic masculinity, it seems like be a man, but don't be human.
Yeah.
Be a man, but don't be human, though, because humans have emotions. We don't like that. My experience with toxic masculinity is, it's multiple things, but it's how it's affected me the most growing up is a bunch of men who are afraid of every single emotion except anger. The thing about that is something that I learned recently is that, you know, toxic masculinity isn't just exclusive to men. Those who are intersex or women, you know, can be taught toxic masculinity, therefore perpetrate it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I know when we think of toxic, when I think of toxic masculinity, I always think of men. However, it's not just exclusive to men. Just like masculine and feminine traits aren't just exclusive to men and women. You know that there's women who embody masculine and feminine traits. Many people, tons of people, whether they want to admit it or not, embody both.
Yeah.
Because it's a human being. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, to clarify for everyone who aren't familiar with this word, what intersex means, this has been taken out of our history books and it's not been talked about. But do you know what intersex means?
I am not completely familiar
Okay,
with
so intersex are people who are born with both reproductive sex.
Okay.
People who are also born with chromosomes that don't fit male or female. So, in easier words, there are people, every 1 in 10 children who are born intersex. So we were taught male, female, and that's not true. Throughout the majority of history, it was just accepted into society, and now it is not. And I'm not talking about transgender. I'm not talking about people who, you know, identify something else. I mean literally talking about individuals who were born with a vagina and a penis, or individuals who chromosomes are neither male or female.
Yeah.
You know, so there is a third type of human. There's a third type of human variation, and I'm mentioning them because I want to give them recognition. I'm gonna throw out something, and if you catch on to it, folks, I applaud you. If not, that's okay. But I want to give recognition to me as well. So that's important to mention. But going back is that, you know, toxic masculinity.
Okay, and then the point that I was trying to make with this entire rambling that I was just having about the
no, it wasn't rambling at all.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying to be concise, but sometimes I do ramble. So, but that this entire point that I was trying to make about the manosphere and how I see toxic masculinity being perpetuated in it is that
it often sells itself on offering a cheap solution to a complex problem. Because toxic masculinity will, in most cases, not contribute to genuine self-love.
Right. It doesn't promote that. It doesn't, you know, thrive off of that. It makes me, in the sake of vulnerability time, you know, well, y'all already know this, but I was raised to be toxic masculinity. My father was the definition of toxic masculinity. You know, and you know, he was just a very toxic masculinity person. And I'm thinking about saying that word differently, maybe saying broken masculinity or something, because I noticed with me, when I say toxic masculinity, I'm internalizing masculinity as just bad.
Yeah, we shouldn't do that. Yeah.
But that's that word, that term isn't saying that necessarily, but it can be internalized as that, for me at least.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think, okay, maybe broken masculinity, because that way it will help me humanize men more. Because what my problem is, that I'm working on with therapy, and I've been working on for years, and I'm so proud of myself how far I've come, is toxic masculinity has now made me view men as not humans, but as man. You know, and what is man? That limiting box that society says this is what you can and cannot be.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've struggled to now. Okay, now I can view, let's say, someone who identifies as male.
Yeah.
I can view you so differently. I can view you as an individual, as
Yeah.
a human,
Yeah.
because you've been vulnerable. You know what I mean? However, if I look at men, not counting you, but if I look at men and I don't know them, if I look at them as a group, I don't see human.
That is very dangerous. It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't have to explain it to you, but I just want to mention that the way we use our language and frame things inadvertently influences how we perceive things and how we think about them. And if we consistently mention the term toxic masculinity, we imply that masculinity at a point is toxic.
Right.
Which is not true, because
Right.
there are alternative visions of masculinity which are very, very inherently positive and beneficial to the communities around us, right? And so, yeah, I agree with you that constantly using that term and hyperfixating on it when referring to men and only thinking in those terms, it dehumanizes people. Right? When often people who do have toxically masculine traits sometimes might be misguided, or sometimes they're still human beings, you know, but they just have some traits which are not very productive for social cohesion, I would say, right?
Right.
And yeah, so I don't like to use that term to begin with, but it is a phenomenon that does exist.
Right.
So,
Right.
And I think so that whole part, and I think this is why I chose those two topics.
Yeah.
Toxic masculinity and self-love, because these two topics, for many men, they intersect. And I can speak from experience, because I was in that boat too. I also had toxically masculine traits, a lot of them, because I thought it's a solution to the deep, what I was mentioning earlier, the deep inadequacies that I was feeling about myself. And I thought that masking it with toxically masculine traits and just pushing through it and getting to the points that I wanted to be is going to give me that gratification and that self-respect that I wanted. And it didn't. And I had points where I did reach my goals and was like ruthlessly going after them, but it didn't give me that satisfaction that I craved, because I was still deep down, I was still being insecure, but now I just had more material validation of others. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that in order to reach people who are on this path and to show them like a more genuine path to self-love, we have to build communities which are really strong and accepting, and show them a little bit of empathy for where they are.
Yeah.
Let them be vulnerable.
That's right. Creating a culture where vulnerability can happen, where humans can actually be human.
Yeah.
You know, I learned in therapy the other day that, you know, a lot of my anger, I used to hate men.
Okay.
But a lot of my anger, something that I learned is like, what if?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not just angry at men. What if I'm angry at the system that affected them?
Yeah.
The system that taught them and told them from a young age, this is how you should be.
Yeah.
Strip all this human stuff away. But be this box.
Be man. Yeah.
Be man, you
Yeah.
know, don't be human. You know, and so it's been a journey for me to work on that.
Yeah.
You know, and like you said, you know, toxic masculinity, that does exist.
Yeah.
You know, however, for me, like I mentioned earlier, I'm working on trying to find another word that is similar to that, but isn't like those two statements of toxic masculinity together. Because for me, I begin to internalize it and see masculinity as just toxic.
Yeah.
You know, when that is not the case, you know what I mean? And so that's something that I'm noticing within myself. And so y'all know on here that I try my best to just
examine and analyze. I'm looking at the time, making sure.
Yeah, of course.
Examine and analyze, why I'm thinking a certain way. I like to be self-reflective and stuff like that. And so that's something that I noticed recently. Is that though that is a phenomenon, that is true. That is a concept that does exist.
Yes.
However, I became internalizing it differently over time. It's kind of like a slow burn.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of like little children. Let's say if they're overweight because of something genetic or something, but all they see on TV is someone with this body that's, not theirs. That looks completely different. Over time, they could internalize that that something's wrong with them. So what I'm saying is like a lot of these subliminal messages, especially just outright messages, can definitely affect us. Yeah. But anyways, going back a little bit though, to the toxic masculinity.
But I think this is what fills that mold of the word toxic.
I'm serious, because if you think about it, those suggestions and those nudges that we receive from many cultural aspects or places of influence lead us to embrace what sometimes become self-destructive behaviors or destructive behaviors for the community that you're in. And what you're seeing, if you want to metaphorize it, if you want to metaphorize it, what you're seeing is a slow decay of oneself and also the community around you, and decay can be associated with toxicity. You know? And so I understand it. And I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I just wanted to mention that it goes into that.
Yeah. I'm glad that. Thanks for sharing. Is there anything else you would like to? I got one thing.
Yeah.
Two things that I'm going to say. One, we're nearing the end of the episode because I do want to be respectful of your time. Folks, I want to challenge you today to tell or text or call one person and just tell them that you're grateful for them.
Yeah.
Just
I love
one.
that.
Just don't overwhelm yourself. Just one. You just never know who might need to hear it. I'm going to do that as well. And then two, Jamayne,
yeah.
if there's, would you like to add anything else? What would you say? How about this?
Yeah.
Is there any advice or words of encouragement that you would say to someone right now who is maybe suffering from the societal definition of a man? And they're denying themselves, they're hating themselves maybe. Is there any words of encouragement that you would like to offer to someone who's listening?
Yes.
In your shoes.
I think this is going to be a little bit more conservative advice, but I think it rings true. If you have an idea who you are, if you don't have an idea who you are, the first thing I would recommend is sit down, journal your thoughts, think about who you are, try things, explore, see what you like, go after that. And then if you figure out who you are, go after that, do things which are consistent with that, find a profession in that area which you're really passionate about, find people who are passionate about this too. It can also be a hobby, it doesn't necessarily have to be your job, but I would encourage both. Find people who are passionate about this too, and get into a community of like-minded individuals who are passionate about the same things. Be congruent, be consistent, and I promise everything else will come by itself, because you will be in a community of people who genuinely care about you. It will be easy to make friends. And if you still struggle, because not everyone is the same, of course, if you still struggle, there are resources out there to reach out, to talk to share your vulnerabilities with, which will not judge you for it.
Right.
And normalcy
is not inadvertently tied to being hyper successful in all areas of your life, but normalcy is just being a human being, accepting who you are and making the absolute best of who you are as a person. And that is some general life advice which I think will often lead to happiness and will often lead people on the right path.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, that's all for Vulnerability Time, episode number whatever. 115, 116, 115. That's right, because I'm gonna
Crazy.
upload this. I'm gonna upload this within 24 hours. Folks,
Remember to buy my books. The link is in the episode description below. Get you some healing. Let's see. And I think that's pretty much it. Alrighty, I'll see y'all next episode for whatever that will be.
oh yes, next episode, folks, will be me talking about intersex and why I identify as
His, hers, and theirs.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Thanks, y'all.